From the shadows of early 1800s, America comes a story of a forest that hungers for human flesh, a black tree that remembers every life it consumes. Wherever you're watching from, be warned. This isn't just a story, it's a warning. Before we descend into the roots of terror, hit that subscribe button and join us, because once you enter, there's no turning back. The year was 1801, and the land that men had not yet tamed still whispered in a language older than breath. Across miles of pine and shale, where the mountains flattened into forgotten valleys, there lay a place the maps did not care to name. The settlers who built there called it Ash Grove, though no ash grew in its soil. It was a village of barely 20 families, surrounded by trees that looked older than time, their bark like blackened stone, their crowns blotting out the sky even at noon. The air always smelled faintly of iron, the kind of scent that lingers after rain has fallen on rust or blood. The people who came there had fled something not all the same thing, but each their own private ruin. Some had run from debt, some from disease, some from law. They came to Ash Grove because the land was cheap and the soil rich, and because it was far enough from everything that no one came looking. But the land beneath their feet was not theirs. It never had been. It had belonged to the forest, and to something that lived within it, patient as rot. The first who built there, a man named Ephraim Lode, had chosen the clearing where the earth rose slightly, as though some great thing slept beneath it. He had cut down the smaller trees and left one standing, a tall, strange thing with roots, like the twisting limbs of a drowned man, reaching out through the ground in all directions. Its bark was gray, veined with something darker, almost red, as though it had veins that pulsed beneath. The leaves were few and waxen, glimmering like metal when the light caught them. He left it, because it was too large to cut, and because his axe had broken the first time he tried. He had said, half in jest, that the tree would stand guard over his house. But within a season, he was gone, vanished between one dusk and the next, leaving behind only the smell of something turned in the soil, and his wife's mind scattered like chaff in the wind. The others said wolves. They said madness. They said the woods swallowed him whole, and the talk faded as talk always did in hard times. But the ground remembered. By winter, more had gone missing. Hunters who followed deer into the woods never came back. The snow covered what it could, but sometimes, when the thaw came, the villagers found pieces, not bones, not clean remains, but things half swallowed by roots, wrapped in fibrous tendrils like veins through muscle. They would burn what they found, and pray, and keep working the land, because there was nothing else to do. Hunger has a way of making a man look away from the pard, truth when it stands too near. The tree grew taller that year. The roots swelled, breaking through the earth like the ridges of buried ribs. It seemed to hum at night, not a sound exactly, but a vibration in the ground that one could feel through the soles of one's feet, like the slow pulse of a buried heart. Animals would not go near it. The fields closest to its shadow grew faster, thicker, richer, the crops blood red and heavy. The villagers did not question their good fortune. They did not see the cost. In spring, the rain came early, and the soil turned soft. Children played in it, digging with their hands, until one day, one of them unearthed something that should not have been there, a jawbone, still wet, as though it had never dried. They said it must have been from an animal, though the shape was wrong. The bone vanished that night, taken by someone who did not wish it seen. The next morning, the roots had shifted again, closer to the houses. Ash Grove began to dream. They dreamed of the forest moving, of the tree bending low, of something whispering beneath the ground. The dreams were always the same. The sound of breathing, slow and enormous, beneath the soil. The taste of sap like blood. The feeling of being watched from below. As months passed, the village changed in small ways that no one spoke of. The meat they ate grew tougher, darker, as though the animals themselves had turned strange. The water in the wells took on a taste like old coins. The children grew silent, their eyes always drifting toward the woods. At night, the wind through the trees made a sound like distant weeping. And still, the people stayed. It is easier to fear the unknown than to starve in the known. It was not until the second winter that they began to understand that something beneath a tree was not merely growing, it was waking. The earth around it had begun to sink, as though the roots were drinking not water but the ground itself. Birds that landed on its branches would fall dead before taking flight. Foxes disappeared near its base. The air there was always warm, even when frost coated the rest of the world. When one stood near it, one could feel faintly a rhythm, a pulse, a hunger. They had stopped burying their dead near it, but that had not stopped the ground from feeding. The graves near the old clearing would shift in the night, and sometimes the soil would split open, leaving hollows where bodies had been. The elders said nothing. They only crossed themselves, though none of them had been in church for years. When the thaw came again, the first to notice the smell was the boy who tended the goats. It was a scent like copper and sweet rot, heavy enough to stick to the back of his throat. He followed it toward the clearing and found the ground wet with something that was not rain. The tree's roots were slick with red, and the bark glistened as though oiled. The boy ran, but by dusk, he too was gone. The villagers searched with torches, but the forest swallowed sound. When they reached the clearing, they found the tree taller still. Its branches curved down as though an offering. At its base, something gleamed: a button, a scrap of cloth, and a single shoe. They dug around the roots, but found nothing. When morning came, the earth had sealed itself smooth again, as though it had never been touched. The tree kept growing. No one went near it anymore. But it didn't matter. Its roots reached farther than they knew, beneath the fields, beneath the wells, beneath the houses themselves. The village began to hear things at night. The shifting of earth, the creak of timbers as though something enormous moved below. Cattle refused to eat. Dogs barked at the ground until their throats went raw. The fear became part of their breath, their food, their blood. It lived with them, unseen but constant, like the warmth from a fire that cannot be extinguished. When the ground finally opened, it did so, without warning. A sound like thunder split the night, and the earth heaved as though exhaling after centuries of holding its breath. The tree shuddered. Its roots burst through the soil, wet and gleaming, coiling like serpents. The air filled with the smell of rot and sap and iron. The villagers watched from their windows as the ground around the clearing caved inward, a great hollow forming where the oldest tree stood. No one spoke. No one ran. They only watched, transfixed, as the tree began to move. It did not move like a living thing should. It unfolded, each branch straining outward, as though reaching for something unseen. The bark split open in long, wet seams, and from within came a sound like sighing, a sound that carried through the night and into their bones. The roots trembled, and beneath them the soil shifted, as though swallowing. Something heavy dragged itself deeper, feeding, settling back into the dark. When morning came, the clearing was still again. The tree stood untouched, silent, beautiful, glistening, faintly in the new light. The villagers said nothing. They went back to their work. But they all knew what they had seen. And they all knew that something in the ground had changed. From that day, no one set foot near it. And yet, as the seasons passed, they began to vanish one by one, as though the earth itself were claiming them. The roots had learned the shape of flesh. Spring arrived in silence, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence that follows something unspeakable, the kind that sits on the chest of a village and does not lift. The air hung thick and strange, and the color of the soil had changed. It was darker now, rich and soft, and faintly red when the rain struck it. The people of Ash Grove tried not to notice. They told themselves it was only the work of the thaw, that the floods from the mountain had brought down new silt. But at night, when the wind crawled across their roofs, they could hear the low groan of earth beneath them. It was the sound of something full and restless. The fields grew faster than ever. The wheat rose shoulder high by midsummer, heavy-headed and pale, bending under its own weight. The corn was thicker, the beans larger, and the roots of everything reached down so deep that they tore through the hands that tried to harvest them. The village ate well that year. They did not ask why. But the ground had begun to breathe. If one stood still in the fields long enough, one could feel it, the faint rising and falling of the earth, slow as the tide. It was most noticeable near the old clearing where the black tree stood. The air there shimmered faintly, and flies gathered, though nothing dead lay visible. The bark of the tree had begun to glisten like fresh meat. Sap bled from its trunk, thick and red, dripping slowly into the soil. Where it fell, mushrooms grew pale, translucent, their caps soft as flesh. Children whispered that the mushrooms whispered back, that if you leaned close enough, you could hear the voices of those who had gone missing. No one scolded them for the stories. The adults had learned to listen too. The tree's shadow reached farther each day. Even when the sun stood high, its shape seemed to stretch beyond reason, crawling toward the houses nearest the woods. The air within that shadow was cold and heavy, and no bird crossed it. The villagers began to move away, abandoning the houses that stood closest. But still, the roots found them. They crept unseen beneath the soil, worming their way toward warmth and blood. Dogs began to vanish first, goats next, then the people who went looking for them. The forest was never still. At night, the trees seemed to lean closer together, their branches interlocking like hands in prayer. The spaces between them were darker than shadow places, where light refused to exist. There was a rhythm in those woods now, something deep and ancient, as though the land itself remembered hunger. By midsummer, the smell had returned. It came from the wells this time, faint at first, then stronger. The water turned metallic, then thick, until even boiling could not hide the taste. The people began to drink less, their lips cracked and tongues blackened. They took to melting snow or catching rain, but still the sickness came. It began with trembling hands, then weakness, then sleep that would not end. Those who died were buried far from the tree, but by the next dawn the graves were always empty. They said it was the work of wolves or men desperate for food. But no tracks marked the soil, and no sound was heard in the night save the slow cracking of wood and the endless murmur beneath the ground. The earth had grown restless. The land wanted. And then came the first storm. It rose without warning, black clouds boiling from the horizon, lightning splitting the sky in white veins. The wind tore across the village, bringing with it the stench of wet iron. The tree at the clearing bent under the gale, but it did not break. Instead, it seemed to sway in time with the thunder, its branches lifting, its roots shifting beneath the mud like muscles beneath skin. The rain came red that night, thick and strange, staining the roofs and the fields alike. When it stopped, the forest glowed faintly in the dark, as though lit from within. The villagers found the next morning that the fields had grown overnight. The corn stood taller than a man. The roots had burst through the soil, twisted and knotted. The ground felt soft beneath their feet, almost breathing. Some said they could feel a pulse when they stepped near the tree line, slow, deep, endless. That night, a house sank. It happened just after dusk, a sound like thunder, then a hollow groan. The ground opened beneath the foundation, swallowing half the structure whole. By the time others arrived, the earth had already begun to close again, pulling timber and stone and flesh alike into itself. Only the roof remained above the soil, trembling, before it too disappeared beneath the roots. The tree at the clearing shuddered once, then was still. After that, the village stopped sleeping. They lit fires that burned all night, but the flames did little. The air had grown too heavy, too damp. Smoke clung low and refused to rise. Those who stayed inside felt the walls shift around them, as though something beneath the floorboards moved in its sleep. The old well collapsed next, then the road, then the barn. Every hole filled itself with new growth roots, vines, weeds, all pulsing faintly as if they shared a single breath. The villagers began to flee, but the forest had no edges anymore. The trees had spread across the plains, closing the paths that once led out. The sky itself seemed to darken, as though the light had grown tired of watching. By the third week, Ash Grove was gone. Where houses had stood, the forest now grew thick, wet, eternal. The black tree towered above them all, its crown lost in cloud, its trunk slick and gleaming. Its roots covered what had once been the village-like veins across a body. The earth beneath them heaved and sighed, and the air tasted of metal and decay. But beneath the roots, something else moved. It was not the tree, not exactly. It was the thing that had become one with it, the thing that had found in it a vessel. It had learned the shape of the human form from what it had consumed. It had learned the rhythm of the heart, the texture of the skin, the warmth of the breath. The ground below Ash Grove was no longer earth. It was flesh made of soil, veins made of root, marrow made of stone. The forest was alive, and it remembered every face it had swallowed. When travelers came years later, they spoke of a strange place, a grove so lush that even in winter it bloomed. They said the ground there was soft, and when they walked across it, it felt almost warm. They said the tree at its center was the tallest they had ever seen, its bark dark and smooth, its sap thick and sweet. They camped there sometimes, though none stayed long. They said the dreams were too heavy, that they could feel something breathing beneath them. Some nights, they said, the ground opened a little, and the roots reached out slow, curious, tender, as if searching for something they had once known. Years passed, though time did not move the same within the valley. Seasons folded into each other like layers of damp paper. Snow came and went without melting, rain fell without sound, and the forest thickened until the sun could no longer reach the floor. Travelers learned to skirt the lowlands, choosing the longer mountain paths rather than cross the place the old maps had once called Ash Grove. They said compasses failed there, and the air carried a taste of metal even in the windless calm. What remained of the village slept beneath moss and bark. Roof beams had become roots. Doors were now hollow trunks. Where a road once ran, a slow river of sap wound through the ground, reflecting no light. The black tree stood unchanged at the center, impossibly tall, its crown buried in mist. Birds did not land on it, and when rain touched its bark, the droplets slid upward instead of down. Beneath it, the earth still pulsed slower now, as though digesting. Beyond the valley, people told stories. A hunter in 1805 claimed to have found bones half fused to wood, ribs curving into branches, skulls blooming like flowers. A trader swore that at night he had seen faces in the bark, human and faint, moving with each flicker of lightning. Others dismissed these tales as frontier madness, but none who entered the grove twice ever spoke of it again. The silence surrounding the valley became its own kind of border. Yet the hunger beneath the soil had learned patience. Roots extended mile by mile, thin as veins, invisible beneath the loam. They slid under creeks and fences, beneath the feet of settlers who built new cabins farther north. Wherever they touched, the ground grew lush. Crops thrived at first, then withered suddenly, leaving the earth black and soft. Livestock began to vanish again. Farmers blamed wolves, then disease, then one another. The forest crept closer each year, reclaiming the clearings, swallowing fences and paths. By 1810, a new settlement rose 20 miles away, built by those who believed the soil there to be blessed. They called it Prospect Hollow, and its people worked the ground with gratitude. The harvests were enormous, the wheat heads swollen, the corn sweet and red gold. They praised the land for its mercy, not knowing that the same roots that had fed on Ash Grove now fed them in turn. The air around Prospect Hollow smelled faintly of honey and rust. Children there grew tall but pale, and the fields whispered when the wind passed over them. At night, the soil moved. Tiny fissures opened and closed like breathing mouths. Worms surfaced and died in heaps. When it rained, the puddles ran red for a moment before clearing. The settlers spoke of dreams of standing beneath a tree they had never seen, of feeling the ground sway like a heartbeat beneath their feet. They woke with dirt under their nails, though they had not left their beds. One evening in late autumn, a fire started at the edge of the forest. It should have spread quickly, the brush was dry. The wind strong, but the flames stopped suddenly at an invisible line. The smoke turned dark and sank instead of rising, pooling across the ground like fog. In the morning, the trees were untouched, the grass wet with something thicker than dew. From that day forward, nothing burned in Prospect Hollow. Even torches hissed out when raised too near the woods. The land had found a way to protect its own flesh. Winter came early, sealing the valley under a crust of ice. Beneath it, the roots continued their slow crawl toward warmth. They reached the well first, lining its stones with pale filaments. Then they reached the barns, coiling around the foundations until the walls groaned. When the thaw arrived, the village awoke to find the ground sunken in places, as though the frost itself had eaten through. Animals refused to drink. The people began to leave offerings, bread, milk, meat at the forest's edge, old habits reborn without memory of their source. The offerings vanished, but the earth did not soften. As years turned, the forest expanded beyond the reach of men. Maps redrew themselves. Trails vanished under new growth. Trappers who ventured near found antlers caught in branches, hides stretched across trunks like bark. They said the woods breathed, that in deep fog one could hear the slow inhale and exhale of something vast. Some swore the trees were moving, not in the way of wind, but with purpose, leaning, listening, remembering. The black tree at the heart of it all had changed. Its roots now spanned miles, its crown unseen. The sap that dripped from its trunk had turned clear, almost luminous, pooling in hollows like liquid glass. When animals drank from it, their eyes grew pale, their movements slower, their hearts quiet. The forest grew silent except for the low tremor of life, feeding upon life. By 1820, no settlements remained within a day's travel. What had been a valley was now a continent of trees. Travelers who crossed the range spoke of finding bones turned to wood, of birds whose wings unfurled into leaves, of voices rising from the ground during storms soft, human sounds repeating only one long sigh. The land itself had become a mouth, and everything that walked upon it was only another word upon its tongue. Still, it was not satisfied. Hunger, once awakened, does not sleep again. The roots pressed onward, deeper into the earth and outward toward the light. They followed rivers, coiled beneath roads, touched the foundations of towns that had never heard the name Ash Grove. The first world above changed. Machines came, rails, iron, smoke, but the soil below remained the same, pulsing dark. Men built and dug and mined, never knowing that each strike of the pickaxe opened another vein. And sometimes, when the ground gave way without reason, when tunnels collapsed or wells caved in, those who listened carefully could hear beneath the rumble a low, wet sound like the drawing of breath through roots. The forest never stopped growing. By the mid-1820s, the land that had once been Ash Grove and its surrounding valley had become something else entirely. A forest without memory of men, yet full of their echoes. Trees twisted together in impossible configurations, their bark smooth in some places, gnarled and flayed in others, and roots snaking across the forest floor like a mass of grasping hands. The soil itself was rich and black, almost wet with a pulse that could be felt if one knelt long enough, pressing their palm against it. Travelers who stumbled into the outer edges of the forest reported that the ground seemed to shift beneath them, like it had legs hidden beneath the earth, walking. Some claimed to hear laughter soft, wet, impossibly human carried in the wind, though the air was otherwise still. The black tree at the center, which once rose in solitary prominence over Ash Grove, had grown into something vast and unknowable. Its trunk now split and branched far below the canopy, roots thick as the trunks of entire forests. Its sap shimmered faintly like molten metal, and the air around it had a strange quality, heavy, slightly sweet, metallic, and impossible to ignore. It did not merely dominate the landscape, it had begun to remake it in its own image, feeding and stretching, swallowing and exhaling slowly beneath the soil. The few who ventured near reported a sensation of being watched from every direction at once. It was not fear alone, but a kind of recognition, the sense that the forest knew them intimately, and had always known them. Hikers and hunters who entered alone often returned unrecognizable gaunt, with eyes that shone faintly red in the dark, murmuring names of people long dead, claiming they had been waiting. No one dared ask what they meant, for those who lingered too long became permanent additions to the soil. The ground swallowed them with such stealth that no trace remained beyond the faint smell of iron and rot. The expansion of the forest did not stop at the old village site. The roots grew beneath rivers, splitting stones and twisting their beds, and beneath the roads that settlers had laid. Even towns 10 miles distant began to feel the subtle hunger of the soil. Animals went missing, wells thickened with a coppery film, and crops near the edge of the forest sometimes wilted overnight without explanation. The pulse of the forest was slow, deliberate, and inexorable. By 1830, the legend had begun to take form among the scattered settlers of the surrounding valleys. Stories spoke of a cursed grove, A black heart in the forest where men disappeared and returned only as whispers and hollow-eyed shadows. Tales told of the devouring roots, of sap that licked the soles of one's boots if they dared stand too long, of soil that remembered the shape of flesh and called to it. But the forest, patient and relentless, waited for those who did not believe. Travelers spoke of seeing the black tree rise above the canopy like a tower of dark glass, branches bending unnaturally as though listening for the footsteps of men approaching. In the night, some swore the stars seemed dimmer above it, the sky itself folding inward. Wolves and deer avoided it entirely, leaving its perimeter eerily silent. And yet the forest was alive. The undergrowth moved subtly. Leaves rustled when no wind blew, and the earth sometimes seemed to heave and pulse beneath one's feet, as though a heart beat beneath the roots. Children, when brought near the forest's edge, would sometimes point toward the trees and whisper of faces in the bark, of hands reaching up from the soil, and of voices calling them softly by name. The parents would shush them, but the forest was patient. It did not need their belief to exist. It needed only the passage of time. By the late 1830s, the hunger that had begun beneath the black tree had begun to shape the land more aggressively. Hills split open where the roots pressed, small sinkholes forming to swallow livestock, then humans. Farmers reported that fences and outbuildings near the forest were ripped from the ground, swallowed by soil that hardened only after the devouring. The ground in these zones became almost rubbery underfoot, strange ridges appearing and disappearing overnight, as though something massive moved just beneath the surface. The forest itself seemed to communicate with those who entered, not in words, but in sensation. A tightening of the chest, a chill that crept up the spine, a faint vibration in the soles of the feet. Even the bravest woodsmen admitted that they could feel it studying them, learning their movements, remembering their faces, waiting for the exact moment to act. Those who lingered too long vanished entirely, leaving behind nothing but the whisper of the roots' hunger in the soil. By 1840, the cursed forest had become more than a legend. It had begun to influence the surrounding lands. Crops failed in certain areas, water wells thickened with copper, and livestock disappeared without trace. Towns near the forest's edge began relocating farther afield, leaving the edge of the forest to reclaim what had once been theirs. And in the center, the black tree stood, older than men, taller than the tallest structures, pulsing with slow, deliberate hunger. Its roots stretched beneath the land like veins through the heart of the earth itself. Time passed. Decades folded upon decades, and the hunger of the forest only deepened. Men who lived near its edges began to report dreams of Ash Grove, the vanished village of the early 1800s, as if the memory of the tree and its roots could reach through time itself. They dreamed of the ground opening beneath their feet, of hands made of soil reaching up to pull them into the earth. They dreamed of the black tree bending over them, its sap slick, its bark pulsing like skin. And when they awoke, the soil in their yards sometimes shifted slightly, revealing small rootlets glimmering like veins, as if the forest itself were watching, patient and eternal. The forest had learned the shape of human life, and it remembered every face, every breath, every heartbeat. It had grown beyond Ash Grove, beyond Prospect Hollow, beyond any settlement that dared to touch the soil it had claimed. Its hunger was no longer hidden. It was deliberate, an inexorable force, patient beyond the measure of men. And beneath it all, the roots pulsed in slow rhythm, echoing the memory of blood, of flesh, of power, everything they had consumed. By the mid-1840s, the forest had stretched far beyond the hills that once sheltered Ash Grove. Its edge was no longer simply trees. but a wall of shadow and movement, the ground trembling subtly beneath each step. Travelers spoke of the way the soil seemed to give underfoot, then tighten, gripping like a hand, urging them back. Streams that ran near its border would sometimes vanish, swallowed by root tunnels that pulsed beneath the earth like veins in a living body. Even the wind hesitated, carrying with it a faint metallic scent, the echo of rot, and the taste of something ancient and patient. The black tree at the center of the grove remained, taller than the tallest pines, its branches spreading like an endless crown, its sap thick and reflective in the muted sunlight. It was no longer merely a tree. It had become a nexus, the anchor of the forest's hunger, the heart of a land that consumed in silence. Roots thick as serpents now coiled beneath the valley, stretching into neighboring fields, curling beneath towns, and threading beneath paths that men and animals used for generations. Wherever the roots touched, the earth became different, softer, warmer, and faintly alive. Farmers and settlers learned to fear it. Those who tried to till soil near the forest's edge found it resisting, as though the roots themselves moved against the plow. Livestock refused to graze in certain fields, turning away from areas where the roots had crept beneath. Dogs and cats would grow restless, barking at unseen movements beneath the ground. People began speaking of the land itself as alive, not metaphorically, not spiritually, but literally, as though it had teeth and memory and patience. It was during one unusually long summer that the first new vanishings occurred. A merchant, traveling with his wagon, reported that his horses had stopped suddenly, their eyes wide, refusing to move. The soil beneath their hooves seemed to ripple like water. Before he could act, the ground opened slowly beneath the wagon, swallowing it inch by inch. When townsfolk arrived, they found no trace of horse, wagon, or man, only a perfectly smooth depression in the earth, the soil undisturbed, as if it had always been hollow. From that day, the land whispered stories of the devouring roots, and fear began to seep into the surrounding settlements like frost through the cracks of an old cabin. The black tree's influence was subtle, insidious. It did not merely take, it shaped. Seeds dropped by travelers who wandered too near often sprouted into strange forms, leaves glistening, faintly red or waxy, roots coiling beneath the surface in patterns impossible to discern. The forest grew thicker each year, swallowing meadows, hills, and streams. The earth hummed constantly, low and deep, a vibration that could be felt in the bones. Those who came close enough to kneel on the soil sometimes reported faint impressions of faces half-formed, pressed against the earth from below, as though watching, waiting, breathing beneath the surface. By 1850, the surrounding towns had begun to regard the forest with superstition and dread. Few dared approach, and those who did rarely returned, unchanged. Some claimed to see shadows of men within the trees, figures bent and twisted, skin glistening like bark, eyes hollow but aware. Travelers reported hearing voices beneath the roots, faint, human, insistent, calling out names that had not been spoken in decades. Some who attempted to flee the edges of the forest swore they were being followed, though no footsteps sounded behind them. It was as if the land itself had learned to mimic life, to lure the curious closer. Children were particularly affected. Those who wandered too near the forest's edge would return pale and silent, their eyes distant, staring at something unseen. At night, they whispered names of people they had never met, recalled villages they had never seen, and often refused to eat, claiming the forest called to them. Parents could only watch in helpless terror. Some left the children at the forest's edge, hoping to appease whatever force dwelled beneath. When they returned the next day, the offerings were gone, and the children were gone as well. By the late 1850 seconds, The forest had begun to affect not just the land, but the very flow of life around it. Streams grew murky and warm, carrying faint traces of sap. Animals disappeared without trace, their tracks vanishing before discovery. Crops near the edges of the forest thrived, then rotted suddenly, leaving soil soft and black. Travelers swore that the trees themselves shifted subtly, leaning, twisting, opening pathways that seemed natural but were impossible to follow. Those who became lost rarely returned, and when they did, they were hollow, their movements unnaturally slow, their eyes distant and red-tinged, their memories incomplete. The black tree's crown was no longer visible, even from the tallest hills. Its trunk had thickened, the bark glistening faintly like wet stone. The forest at its center was silent, save for the low thrum of movement beneath the soil, the constant pulse of hunger. Its roots pressed outward, reaching farther than any man could see, and still it waited. The land itself remembered the taste of flesh. Every root, every vein beneath the soil, every hollow in the ground retained memory. Memory of Ash Grove, of Prospect Hollow, of all the vanished souls, feeding the growth of the forest, teaching it patience, teaching it hunger. And beneath it all, the black tree thrummed with life, a central heart that pulsed slowly, methodically, eternally. By 1860, the story had become legend. The forest was no longer just a danger to nearby towns. It had become a myth whispered across generations. Travelers spoke of it in hushed tones. The black heart, the devouring roots, the forest that remembers and waits. No one attempted to enter it willingly. Maps marked the valley as cursed, abandoned, and impassable. Those who lingered near its edges sometimes found their feet sticking to the soil for no reason, the ground pulsing beneath them like a heartbeat. And when they looked down, the earth appeared to ripple, faintly glowing red in certain places, as if veins of blood ran just beneath the surface. The hunger endured. It did not rush. It did not panic. It only waited. It had centuries to learn patience, to expand, to stretch its roots into every crevice of the valley, to weave its power into the soil, the stone, the water, and the air itself. And beneath it all, the roots pulsed, always pulsed. By the 1,860 seconds, the forest's reach had expanded far beyond the valley that had once contained Ash Grove. It was no longer merely a forest. It was a dominion of shadow and pulse, a living, breathing entity whose influence seeped into the surrounding lands like water through soil. Hills flattened beneath its growth, streams twisted into unnatural paths, and even the wind seemed to bend around it, carrying whispers that no one could interpret. Travelers who approached too closely described a sensation of being watched from beneath the ground, as though the soil itself had eyes, veins, and teeth, and recognized every living creature that stepped upon it. The black tree remained the heart of the forest, its crown now lost in clouds, its trunk impossible to measure, roots stretching into every corner of the valley and beyond. Its sap had turned almost luminous, thick and sweet-smelling, a substance that seemed to preserve memory as well as feed the hunger below. Those who came into contact with it even indirectly, through soil, water, or wind, carried the impression of it in their dreams. They saw the tree bending over them, saw roots unraveling beneath their feet, felt the pulse of the earth beneath them in rhythms that matched their own heartbeats. The forest's hunger was methodical. It did not strike blindly, but tested boundaries, nudging settlements, altering the growth of crops, subtly shifting streams and paths. Livestock began to vanish in patterns that suggested intelligence. Horses taken one at a time, sheep left alive just long enough to witness others disappear, Animals avoided the forest completely, though insects and smaller creatures seemed drawn into it, only to vanish silently. By 1870, the legend had grown into terror. The surrounding towns no longer tried to farm near the forest. Stories spread of men entering it for trade or woodcutting, returning pale, slow, muttering, or vanishing entirely. Travelers spoke of hearing distant groans and wet, sucking noises beneath the soil. Some reported glimpses of limbs or faces inside the bark, moving slowly, pressing outward from the wood as though trying to reach for the living. Others spoke of roots that moved beneath the surface, like fingers, wrapping around stones, fences, even the foundations of houses, leaving nothing, destroyed, yet subtly claimed. The children who wandered near the forest's edge often returned, changed. Their eyes seemed older than their years, distant, reflective of something they had seen beneath the roots. They whispered names of people long dead, recounted places that had vanished decades before, and sometimes refused to eat, murmuring of hunger, calling from the ground. Attempts to restrain or punish them failed. The forest seemed to push them back with a patience older than men. By 1880, the forest had begun to reshape not only the land but the perception of those who lived nearby. Travelers spoke of a strange horizon where the trees seemed to tower unnaturally, their roots breaking through rocks and earth in impossible forms. The wind carried metallic scents that hinted at iron and blood, and even the sun appeared dimmer above the canopy, as if the sky itself were avoiding it. Some swore the soil underfoot pulsed faintly, warming without cause, rippling as if with breath. The forest did not need to destroy openly. Its presence alone was enough to bend life to its rhythm. Settlements near its edge began to relocate or abandon farms. Roads became unnavigable. Animals disappeared. Wells thickened with coppery water. Crops rotted overnight. The forest was a slow, patient predator, growing invisible tendrils beneath the surface of everything, testing, waiting, learning. Every root had memory. Every vein of the soil carried the echo of the past, feeding the hunger below, and the black tree remained. Its crown lost in clouds, its trunk impossible to measure, its sap shimmering with an unholy light. It had become more than tree, it was the axis of the forest, the central heart of a system that spread like veins into the land. Its roots now extended beyond the valley, threading beneath towns and settlements that had no knowledge of its existence. Water wells, roads, and foundations all bore its presence. It was patient. It had centuries to learn, to grow, to remember. Even the land beyond its reach began to tremble. The forest's hunger pressed outward, subtly altering the growth of plants, the movement of animals, and even the sleep of men. Dreams began to carry the memory of the black tree. People far from its edges would wake in terror, sensing something beneath the soil, something ancient and deliberate, pressing outward, waiting. By 1890, the world outside the valley scarcely noticed the forest, yet it was already impossible to ignore. The land itself seemed alive. Even distant rivers pulsed with a strange rhythm, faint but perceptible to those who listened carefully. Travelers would sometimes stumble upon the same whispering voices, soft and wet, rising from soil that should have been empty. Children would point to places no tree or hill could occupy, calling out to shadows that weren't there, faces pressed into bark, hands reaching up from the soil. The forest did not rush. It never needed to. Its hunger endured, slow and methodical. It spread invisibly, carefully, remaking the land in its image. And at its center, the black tree remained, the heart, the anchor, the axis. Roots pulsed beneath the earth like veins. Branches bent toward unseen skies. Sap shimmered with a memory older than men, and the hunger waited, eternal, insatiable, patient beyond reckoning. By the turn of the century, the forest had become a dominion that extended far beyond the memory of Ash Grove. It was no longer merely a collection of trees, roots, and soil. It was an organism, ancient and patient. Its black tree at the center, a nexus of unrelenting hunger. The surrounding hills and valleys had been swallowed, reshaped, absorbed into the pulsing mass of vegetation, its roots threading beneath towns, farms, and rivers, with quiet, inexorable patience. The air near its edge carried a metallic tang, a faint sweetness, and the constant thrum of a heartbeat felt beneath the ground. Travelers and settlers alike spoke of the uncanny sensation that the earth itself watched them, remembered them, and waited. Rivers that flowed near the forest's edge had begun to warp unnaturally. Their beds twisted as roots pressed beneath the rocks, diverting water slowly but deliberately. Fish disappeared. Wells thickened with coppery deposits. Streams carried faint traces of sap, sometimes tinged red. The forest reshaped not only the land, but the flow of life within it. Livestock vanished without trace, crops thrived then rotted overnight, and animals of all sizes avoided the land entirely. The soil itself seemed to pulse with a slow, deliberate hunger. The black tree remained at the center, older, larger, and more impossible with each passing decade. Its trunk had thickened to an unfathomable girth, its crown hidden within clouds, its sap shimmering in pale luminescence. Roots extended in every direction, threading beneath fields, roads, and settlements, invisible yet undeniable. It was not merely a tree, it had become a mind, a sentinel, a patient predator. It remembered every living thing it had consumed, every soul it had buried, every heartbeat it had absorbed. And beneath the soil, its hunger continued to grow. Those who approached its periphery did so at great risk. Travelers reported strange phenomena, whispers that rose from the ground, calling names long forgotten, impressions of faces pressed against the soil, hands and limbs emerging briefly from soft earth before sinking again. Children were particularly sensitive. Those who wandered too close would return pale and silent, eyes distant and glimmering faintly red, their movements slowed. They whispered of visions of the old village, of houses swallowed whole, of the black tree bending over them, waiting. Attempts to restrain them were futile. The forest seemed to push them back, patient and deliberate, as though it was guiding them toward a larger purpose. By 1910, the forest had begun to influence perception itself. Time seemed to slow. Near its edges, travelers reported that days passed differently. A single mile could take hours, while hours themselves felt compressed. Animals acted strangely. Birds circled endlessly without landing. Even the wind seemed hesitant, bending unnaturally around the dense canopy. It was as if the forest had begun to extend its dominion beyond the physical, into the realm of thought, memory, and sensation. Legends persisted. The black tree was called by many names: the devouring heart, the sentinel of roots, the hungry one. People avoided the valley entirely, even though some were drawn to it, compelled by an impulse they did not understand. Those who lingered too long either vanished or returned, changed, hollow-eyed and whispering names of places and people that no longer existed. Farmers who attempted to cultivate fields near the forest found the earth resistant, plowing against an invisible force, soil rising to meet the plow like a living hand. The forest's expansion was not chaotic. It was precise, methodical, and eternal. Every root, every vein of soil, Every hollow beneath its canopy carried memory of Ash Grove, of Prospect Hollow, of every living thing it had consumed. It absorbed and preserved life, not merely for sustenance, but for understanding, patience, and control. It had learned the rhythm of flesh, the patterns of bone, the cycles of fear. By the 1920 seconds, the forest's edge had reached nearly every valley in the surrounding region. Towns on its fringe began relocating en masse, abandoning fertile fields, roads, and homes. The forest had learned to make men leave without violence, using subtle influence. Creeping vines that blocked paths, sudden rotting of harvests, faint tremors beneath the soil, whispers carried on the wind. Those who resisted occasionally vanished without trace, their absence explained by misfortune, disease, or poor judgment. The black tree at the center had become a nearly incomprehensible presence. Its trunk now pulsed, faintly, as though alive with memory and thought. Sap dripped continuously, pooling in hollows like molten glass. Roots extended for miles beneath the forest floor, wrapping around rocks, foundations, and rivers. The soil itself seemed to breathe in response to movement, swelling beneath the feet of humans and animals alike. It was a living map of all it had consumed, a network of sensation, memory, and hunger, slowly stretching outward. By 1930, no one dared enter the forest, and few traveled within sight of it. The valley and surrounding hills had been reshaped entirely by its growth. Legends persisted that the forest was eternal, that the black tree knew the shape of human life, and that those who touched the earth near it were absorbed into its memory. And beneath the soil, the roots pulsed, patient, deliberate, and insatiable. The forest waited. It had always waited. By the mid-1930 seconds, the forest had ceased to be a boundary or a place. It had become a force, a presence that extended invisibly into every corner of the surrounding lands. Its roots no longer respected natural boundaries. They slid beneath towns, roads, rivers, and even railways, searching for warmth, blood, and memory. The soil near its edge quivered subtly, as if alive, and wells sometimes thickened with a metallic film. Crops near the advancing edge flourished at first, then rotted without warning. Livestock vanished quietly, their absence leaving only impressions of fur or hoof in the blackened earth. The black tree remained the heart of it all, impossibly vast, trunk glistening faintly as if wet, crown lost in clouds, roots stretching outward like veins beneath the continent. Sap flowed continuously, its slow, luminous drip a record of every soul the forest had consumed. Travelers who ventured too near reported hallucinations, disorientation, time distorted. Children whispered names of people long dead, described villages that had vanished decades ago, and sometimes refused food, murmuring of the hunger beneath the soil. Those who lingered too long disappeared entirely. The forest's influence began to extend beyond mere physical manipulation. Even towns miles from its edge experienced subtle tremors, strange growth patterns, and dreams filled with whispers. People began to see visions of the black tree in their sleep, roots writhing beneath their feet, faces pressed against bark, hands reaching from soil. Some awoke with dirt under their fingernails, though they had not left their homes. Others spoke of hearing breathing from beneath the floorboards. By 1940, attempts to map or quantify the forest became futile. Roads curved unnaturally near its edges, streams shifted overnight, and hills sank into soft, pulsing soil. The forest was not merely growing, it was learning, reshaping the land according to a logic unfathomable to men. It was patient, deliberate, eternal. Animals acted strangely within its vicinity. Birds circled endlessly without landing. Wolves howled in the distance, then fled as if repelled. Insects moved along unnatural lines, vanishing into soil or roots. Even the wind seemed hesitant, bending around trees that shifted subtly, their branches reaching farther than physics allowed, leaning toward human settlements as if testing boundaries. Settlements abandoned farmlands near the forest's edge, but its reach was already beyond the hills. The black tree pulsed faintly, its sap reflecting a pale light visible through the thick canopy. Its roots carried memory, sensation, and hunger across miles of land. Men who walked the edges reported feeling a pulse beneath their feet, like a heartbeat that slowed and quickened in rhythm with their own. The forest had become a continent of its own, a living entity with the black tree at its center. Every root, every vein of soil, every hollow beneath its canopy retained memory. Ash Grove, Prospect Hollow, every child, animal, and man it had consumed. It had learned the shape of human life, the rhythm of breath and blood, the cycles of fear. By 1950, even distant towns felt its presence. Crops began to fail mysteriously, livestock disappeared quietly, and strange tremors plagued foundations. Travelers reported seeing faces in the trees, shadows moving where none should be, and hearing wet, sucking whispers beneath the soil. Children continued to be sensitive. Those who wandered near the edges of its influence returned pale, silent, distant, muttering names of people long dead. The black tree had become incomprehensible in scale. Its roots threaded beneath valleys, towns, and rivers, veins pulsing beneath the earth like arteries of a living organism. Its crown, still hidden in clouds, bent and shifted, as if sensing the horizon itself. Sap dripped continuously, preserving memory, feeding the hunger, recording every life it had touched. The forest was not merely alive, it was sentient, patient, and eternal. The forest waited. It had always waited. It hungered. It remembered. Beneath the soil, beneath the roots, beneath the black tree itself, the pulse continued. The hunger was deliberate. It was infinite, and it would not stop. By the 1960 seconds, the forest was no longer a singular location. It had become an influence, a force that reshaped the landscape itself. Hills bent and sank where roots pressed beneath them. Rivers twisted unnaturally, redirected by subterranean tendrils. Roads became impossible to follow, curving suddenly or disappearing entirely. Even the soil beneath human feet pulsed faintly, quivering with the memory of what had been consumed. The black tree at the heart of the forest pulsed in response, the central node of a continent-spanning organism, its sap shimmering like liquid glass. Settlements within miles reported subtle horrors. Crops grew rapidly, then decayed in hours. Wells thickened with coppery water. Livestock vanished quietly. Travelers spoke of hearing distant voices rising from the soil, soft and human, whispering names that had not been spoken in decades. Some felt hands press against their ankles as if the earth itself tried to claim them. Children were particularly affected, drawn to the forest's edge with an irresistible curiosity, returning pale, distant, or sometimes never returning at all. The forest's intelligence was deliberate. It did not strike blindly. Roots probed, observing, calculating. Houses near the edge would shift slightly, floors cracking, foundations softening, so subtly that occupants would dismiss it at first. But those who lingered too long vanished quietly, the soil closing over them, as though nothing had existed. Birds avoided the forest. Insects disappeared. Even the wind hesitated, bending unnaturally, carrying metallic scents and faint whispers. The black tree had become something more than a tree. Its crown, stretched beyond clouds, hidden from view. Its trunk pulsed with memory, every root acting as a sensory appendage, every vein beneath. The soil, a line of communication. Sap dripped continuously, recording the past, feeding the present, and preparing for the future. It remembered every village, every child, every animal, every heartbeat it had touched. By the 1970 seconds, the forest's influence had reached beyond local towns. People traveling across distant valleys reported strange phenomena. Rivers that ran strangely, streams bending unnaturally, soil that seemed to resist movement, subtle tremors beneath the earth. Travelers sometimes glimpsed faces in the bark, shadows moving where none should exist, faint red glimmers beneath the soil. Time itself seemed distorted near the forest, moving differently, stretching and compressing unpredictably. The black tree pulsed at the center, feeding the consciousness of the forest. Its roots spread for miles beneath the earth, threading beneath towns, foundations, rivers, and roads, touching every place with subtle intent. It was patient, eternal, and deliberate, a sentient organism that learned, remembered, and hungered. Even those far from the forest felt it. Dreams carried visions of roots writhing beneath their feet, of hands reaching from soil, of the black tree bending over landscapes they had never seen. People awoke with dirt under fingernails they did not recognize, murmuring names of places that no longer existed. The forest reached beyond sight, beyond perception, shaping the land and the minds of those who lived near it. By the 1980 seconds, the forest had become a legend whispered across generations. Few dared approach, fewer dared speak of it aloud. Stories called it the devouring roots, the hungry heart, the black sentinel. Children who ventured too near were drawn into its memory, returned pale and distant, or vanished entirely. Farmers abandoned fields near the edges, unable to grow crops in soil that resisted plows and shovels. Roads and paths twisted unnaturally, streams disappeared overnight, and hills sank where roots pressed beneath. The forest was no longer a threat in the conventional sense. Its hunger was slow, patient, deliberate, stretching roots beneath every inch of the land. It reshaped the landscape according to a logic unfathomable to humans, bending rivers, altering soil, diverting streams, swallowing life quietly, systematically. And at the center, the black tree remained, its crown hidden beyond clouds, trunk glistening like wet stone, roots threading beneath the continent itself. Its sap dripped continuously, preserving memory, feeding hunger, recording every life it had touched. It had learned the shape of human life, the rhythm of blood and breath, the cycle of fear. It remembered. It waited. The forest had grown beyond the comprehension of men. It was eternal, sentient, deliberate. Its hunger was infinite. Beneath it all, the roots pulsed. Always pulsed. By the closing years of the 20th century, the forest had become more than a place, more than a threat, more than a memory. It was a presence, a continent of roots and soil, veins and sap, pulsing with patience and hunger across the land. Towns no longer dared approach its edge. Travelers kept miles away, yet even distance could not shield them from its influence. The soil trembled beneath roads, rivers twisted unnaturally, and the air itself carried metallic whispers, the subtle scent of sap and rot. The black tree at the center had become incomprehensible in scale. Its crown pierced clouds, lost to the sky. Its trunk had thickened beyond measure, bark glistening as though wet with preserved memory. Roots extended beneath the land like arteries, threading beneath foundations, streams, forests, and mountains. Its sap dripped continuously, glowing faintly, recording every heartbeat, every life, every fear, every scream it had absorbed. It was alive, conscious, eternal. Human settlements had become shadows of themselves near its influence. Fields grew rich, then rotted overnight. Livestock vanished quietly, their traces swallowed by the earth. Children born near its edge whispered of faces in bark, of hands reaching from soil, of voices calling their names at night. Travelers reported glimpses of human forms moving unnaturally among the trees, limbs bending like roots, faces pressed against bark. Time itself distorted near its edges. Minutes stretched into hours, days compressed into seconds. The forest's reach had become regional. Streams that never touched it directly twisted toward it. Hills slowly sank where roots pressed beneath. Roads, towns, and railways became labyrinths of impossibility. Those who wandered too near vanished silently, leaving only impressions of themselves pressed into soil or faint traces of sap on stone. The black tree remembered them, stored them, and used them to learn. Every pulse of its roots, every tremor beneath the earth, every shimmer of sap was part of an awareness that had grown for nearly 2 centuries. The hunger had changed. It was no longer only for flesh. It sought memory, thought, experience. It pulled at the minds of those near it, bending perception, whispering through dreams, teaching patience, fear, and recognition. It remembered Ash Grove, Prospect Hollow, every villager, every animal, every traveler, every moment of terror, and it stored them in its veins of root, in the glowing sap, in the pulsing soil beneath. It was patient, eternal, and inexorably deliberate. By the dawn of the new millennium, the black tree had become a force no longer confined to a single forest. Its roots stretched across landscapes, threading beneath towns, rivers, valleys, forests, and plains. Every inch of soil it touched bore its memory. Every river carried the pulse of its presence. Children whispered in dreams of a tree that knew them, of hands in the soil, of voices calling them to join the roots. Travelers avoided entire regions instinctively, and even those far from its influence felt its memory in dreams and fleeting shadows. At the heart of it all, the black tree pulsed continuously. Its crown reached beyond clouds, touching no sky. Its roots threaded beneath continents, veins of memory and hunger running through the land itself. Its sap dripped endlessly, preserving the record of centuries, feeding the endless appetite, and teaching patience to a force that had grown beyond comprehension. It had learned every shape of human life, every cycle of fear, every rhythm of blood and breath. It remembered. It waited. It had always waited. It would always wait. And beneath the soil, beneath every root, beneath every heartbeat it had ever touched, the pulse continued. Always pulsed. The hunger endured. It was infinite. It was eternal. And in the heart of the world, the black tree watched, patient beyond measure, remembering every life, waiting for the day it would be enough. The forest waits. The roots pulse. And the black tree at its center remembers everything, every life, every heartbeat, every fear. If you thought the story ended here, know this: its hunger is eternal, and its memory never forgets. Thank you for watching. And if you survive the descent into darkness, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because the forest is always listening, no matter where you are.